Chirag and welcome to this video. In this video, I am going to cover the long-awaited feature that was recently announced by AWS, which is Mountpoint for S3. Mountpoint for S3 is the open source file client for Amazon S3. With the help of Mountpoint for S3, you can mount or connect to S3 buckets from Linux-based applications or instances and access the data of the S3 bucket as if you are accessing the files or directories on your local file system. In simple terms, it is mounting an S3 bucket on the specified directory on Linux-based operating system. Mountpoint for S3 is optimized for high throughput reads of large files concurrently by multiple users. It is also optimized for writing new files or objects sequentially to the S3 bucket by one user at a time. And currently, unlike read, it do not support concurrent writes from multiple users at the same time. One thing to note here is that Mountpoint for S3 is not a full file system and it does not mean to be one. So if you need or want to use any rich file system feature that is not supported by Mountpoint, then you can consider using Amazon FSx or EFS. However, currently the alpha release is launched and new features will be added in the subsequent releases. So stay tuned for that. Now how Mountpoint works is when you perform read, write or delete operation using Mountpoint, then in the backend it translates these operations to S3 API calls like put object, get object, delete object and so on. So this was the quick brief about Mountpoint for Amazon S3. Now let's have a look at the operations it supports on files and its limitations. For read operation, it supports both sequential and random file reads on existing objects within the S3 bucket. It also supports seeking in an open file. So ideally it supports all the basic read operations. Writes are only allowed to a new file in a sequential manner by one user at a time. Mountpoint uploads new files to S3 asynchronously using multiple concurrent upload requests. And in case if your application needs to guarantee that a new file has been uploaded to S3, then you can use the fsync operation before closing the file. And once you use the fsync operation, you cannot continue writing to that file. Modifying existing files and truncation is currently not supported. Also, you cannot overwrite the existing objects, and in case if you want to create a new file with the same name, then first you need to delete the existing file and then recreate it again. One important thing to note here is that you cannot rename files and directories. With respect to deletes, deletes are disabled by default, and to enable the delete behavior, you need to pass the allow delete flag while mounting S3 bucket. Now when you delete a file with rm command, it instantly deletes the file even if it is in use. In case the file is being currently written, then you cannot delete that file. Delete operation can only be performed on the remote file and not on the local file which is not currently uploaded or committed to the S3 bucket. So guys, these were some of the highlights about read, write and delete operations with respect to files. Now let's quickly have a look at the operations that we can perform upon the directories. For directories, all the basic read-only directory operations are supported. One can create the directories with mkdir command, but the directories created with mkdir command does not create the directory with directory markers like the one created via S3 console. One point to note here is that empty directories created with mkdir command will not reflect on the S3 bucket. It will only reflect on the S3 when there is an object or a file within that folder. And again, I would like to highlight that renaming files and directories is currently not supported. With respect to delete, deletion is disabled by default when you mount S3, and you can enable this behavior by passing the allow delete flag while mounting the S3 bucket. Directories created with the mkdir command will be deleted and can be deleted using rmdir command if those directories are empty. However, you cannot delete the directories which are backed by the directory markers. And once the directory removal command is successful, subsequent reads or writes to that directory or subdirectories will start to fail. So this was the quick brief about the operations with respect to the directories. Now in the next slide, I quickly want to talk about the directory structure and how Mountpoint infers it. So as we know that S3 is not a file system and it has a flat structure with no hierarchy and subdirectories. So how does Mountpoint infers the directory structure like a file system? So the answer is it infers the directory structure by treating the forward slash as the separator. And with that, you are able to see the files, folders and subfolders. One of the limitation with Mountpoint is that you cannot access all the objects in the scenario where bucket contains both the file and directory with the same name. Now in this scenario, as you can see on my screen, so there is an object with the name statement and there is a directory with the same name, that is statement, and within that directory there is a file that is 2023.pdf. So in this scenario, only the directory and the respective file within that directory, which is 2023.pdf, will be accessible via Mountpoint, and you will not be able to access the object with the name statement. So this is one of the limitation about Mountpoint for S3. Now with respect to the metadata and permissions, reading metadata with stat or abstat is currently supported, but metadata modification is not supported as of now. The last status and last access time of any object will be same as the last modified time of the respective object. File mode will default to 0644 for files and 0755 for directories. However, you can override this with file mode and directory mode flags. Now when you mount the bucket, the file owner and group will default to the user or group that mounted the bucket unless you manually configure them with the UID and GID command line arguments. And currently, POSIX file logs are not supported. So that was about metadata and permissions with respect to the files and directories. Now let's talk about logging. Now when you use Mountpoint, by default only the high severity logs are recorded to syslog file, but you can enable verbose logging by passing debug flag. You can also write the logs to the custom location by passing -l or log directory flag. And finally, if you do not want any logs, then you can disable it by passing no log flag. So guys, this was about logging, and after this I want to cover one more slide that talks about the support for storage classes. There are multiple S3 storage classes and we can explicitly select the storage class to which we want to write the file by passing the storage class flag. And by default, Mountpoint uses standard storage class. One of the limitation of Mountpoint is you cannot read the objects which are stored in S3 Glacier Flexible or Deep Archive Retrieval Storage classes or the Deep Archive access tiers of S3 Intelligent Tiering. And this limit also applies even if the objects are restored. But this limit is not applicable to writing new objects into these storage classes. And from the reads perspective, Mountpoint supports reading objects from S3 Instant Retrieval Storage class. So guys, enough of theory, and now let's jump to the AWS Management Console and let's try to mount one of the S3 bucket on the directory within the EC2 instance. Now here, as a part of the hands-on, we are going to launch an EC2 instance and then we are going to install Mountpoint for S3, and subsequently we are going to mount one of the S3 bucket on one of the directory within the EC2 instance. So navigate to EC2 Management Console and launch an instance. Here, as a part of the application and OS images, I will select Ubuntu, but you can also select Amazon Linux if you want. Within AMI, I am going to select Ubuntu Server 22.04. Instance type, I will select t2.micro. Within keypair, I am going to select the existing keypair file, that is flask.pem in my case. Within network settings, I am going to select existing security group and I will select the default security group. Now once you are done with this configuration, click on launch instance. Now once the instance is in running state, copy the public IPv4 address to SSH or login into this instance. So copy the IP address, navigate to terminal, execute a command that is SSH -i stands for the identity file, followed by the identity file, that is flask.pem in my case, followed by the username. So since I selected the Ubuntu as an operating system, the default username will be Ubuntu. In case if you had selected Amazon Linux, then the default username will be ec2-user. So it will be Ubuntu @IPv4 public address, and then press enter. Type yes. So here we have successfully logged in or SSH into the EC2 instance. Now let's execute a command, that is sudo apt-get update. Post successful execution of the update command, we are going to install Mountpoint for S3. Now to install Mountpoint for S3, navigate to this GitHub repository, that is Mountpoint-S3, and scroll down to getting started. Now you need to run these two commands in case if you have selected Amazon Linux as an operating system, right? And in case if you are running that Amazon Linux operating system on Graviton instances, then you need to replace x86-64 with ARM64 within this URL. Okay, and for those who has selected the Ubuntu operating system, will execute these two commands over here. And similarly, if it is on Graviton instance, then again you need to replace x86-64 with ARM64 within this URL. So in my case, I am not using Graviton instance, so I am not going to replace x86 with ARM64. Okay, so copy this command, that is wget, and paste it over here on the terminal, press enter, and this will download the installation file. Now once the file is downloaded, execute another command, that is sudo apt-get install-y, the file name. So copy and paste it over here, press enter, and this will install Mountpoint for S3. So as you can see, the command ran successfully. Now to check if the installation is successful or not, you can execute this command, that is mount-s3, and press enter. So as you can see, it is installed successfully, or you can also check a version saying mount-s3 version. So it says mount-s3, that is 1.0.0. Now since we have installed Mountpoint for S3 successfully, we are going to create one directory over here. So I will say mkdir, I will say mount S3 directory, something like this, right? And on this directory, we are going to connect or mount the S3 bucket. So if I do ls, then we have this directory, that is mount S3-dir. Now let me navigate to the S3 management console and open the bucket that I want to mount. So in my case, I want to mount this recognite1 bucket on the directory that I have just created. So the command to mount the S3 bucket is mount-s3 space bucket name that you want to mount. So in my case, it's recognite1, followed by the directory on which you want to mount this S3 bucket. So in this case, the directory name is mount s3-dir in my case, and then press enter. So here, as you can see, it failed to mount the S3 bucket on the specified directory, and the reason is that EC2 instance do not have permission to access that specific S3 bucket or the S3 service. Now to resolve this issue, we need to provide the permission to this EC2 instance. And to provide the permission to this EC2 instance, you can either configure the AWS credentials on this EC2 instance using your access key and secret key, or else you can create and attach the IAM role. And basically it's a good practice to provide permissions via the IAM role. So we are going to leverage the IAM role option. So let's navigate to IAM management console. Here we have two ways to provide the access or permissions. One way is to create the role and attach the S3 full access policy. The problem with this way is it will end up giving more permissions than required. Second option is to create a custom policy with only required permissions and then create the role with that custom restrictive policy. And in this video, we are going to opt out for the second option. So let's click on policies from the left panel under access management. Click on create policy, and here we are going to select the JSON view to create the policy. Now here the question is, what all permissions do we need to define or do we need to allow? To answer that question, let's think about what will happen when we run the mount-s3 command. So as soon as you run that command, and if it is successful, then you will see all the contents of that specific S3 bucket that you have mounted. So ideally, when we execute the mount s3 command, internally it calls list objects version 2 API to fetch the objects of the given bucket. And as a result, you will be able to see the content or objects of the specified bucket. To allow list object version 2 action, you need to provide permission to list object within IAM policy. So here, as a part of the action, we are going to define list bucket. So click over here, from the right side, search for S3 and then search for list bucket. Select this and then you are done as a part of the action. Now on which resource you want to allow it? So resource will be your S3 bucket on which you want to allow the list bucket operation. So there could be two things, right? You can allow for all the buckets or you can restrict it to a specific bucket. So in my case, I'm going to restrict it. Okay, so as a part of the resource, click on add a resource on the right side. Select the S3 service within resource type, select bucket and replace the bucket name with the actual bucket name. So in my case, it's recognite 1. So basically we are allowing list bucket operation on this specific bucket. Okay, and then click on add a resource. In this policy statement, we have given the permission at the bucket level. As a next step, we need to add another statement to provide permission at the object level. Because after the bucket is mounted and all the objects are listed, we would like to perform operations like read a file which will translate to get object. We would like to write a new file which will translate to a put object, and then we will delete a file which will again translate to a delete object. So we need to add this permission. To add these permissions, add a new statement, select S3 from the right panel, search for get object and select it. Similarly, search for put object and select it. Apart from put object, we will also need abort multipart upload for writing a new file to S3. So search for abort multipart upload and select it. Finally, search for delete object and select it. Now as the next step, we need to define a resource on which we want to allow these permissions. To add a resource, click on add button from the right panel. Within service, select S3. Within resource type, click on object, and within resource ARN, replace this bucket name with your actual bucket name. In my case, it's recognite 1, followed by a wildcard, which means we are allowing the defined permissions on all the objects of the recognite 1 S3 bucket. Okay, so click on add resource and we are done with the policy. Click on next, provide the policy name. I will say mount-s3-ec2 and then click on create policy. Now once the policy is created, let's click on roles from the left panel and create a role. Now here we are going to select EC2 as a service because we are creating this role for the EC2 instance or the EC2 service. Then click on next. Attach the policy that we have just created. So search for that. I will search for mount. That is over here. That is mount s3-ec2. Click on next. Provide the role name. I will say ec2-mountpoint. And then click on create role. Now once the role is created, go back to EC2 management console. Select the instance that we have launched. Click on actions. Click on security, click on modify IAM role. From the drop down, select the role that we have just created, that is ec2-mountpoint in my case, and click on update IAM role. Okay, so here I have successfully attached the IAM role, hence I have successfully provided the permission to this EC2 instance to access the bucket that is recognite 1. So now let's try to rerun the same command, that is mount-s3 followed by the bucket name that we want to mount, that is recognite1 in my case, followed by the directory on which I want to mount this S3 bucket, and then let's press enter. So here as you can see it says bucket recognite1 is mounted at specific directory. Okay, now before we move on, let's quickly open that bucket as well over here. So navigate to S3 management console and I'm going to open this bucket, that is recognite1. So here I have couple of files and folders, right? That is test.txt, extract data, thumbnail and thumbnail directory. So now if I navigate to that directory and do ls, then I should be able to see all these folders and files. So let's go to thumbnail maybe and do ls. Then here we have thumbnail.png. Now let's try to write a file within this thumbnail directory, right? So let me open it over here as well. I will do echo srcecde to a file, let's say test.txt, and press enter. Now if I do ls, then I should be able to see a file that is test.txt, and now if I reload it over here, then I should be able to see that file here as well, that is test.txt. Okay, so this is how you can write a file. You can use any other mode to write a file within this mount directory. Okay, so for example, if you want to read a file, I will say cat test.txt, enter, and I should be able to see the content of that file. Now let's say I want to delete this test.txt. So if I do rm-r test.txt and if I say enter, then it's going to throw an exception saying this operation is not permitted. It's because by default the delete operation is not permitted, and if you want to enable the delete operation, then you need to pass allow delete flag while mounting the S3 bucket. So currently we cannot delete any objects. Now let's try to create a new directory within thumbnail. I will say mkdir test dir as a directory, and now if I do ls, then I should be able to see the test directory and the two files. And now if I reload the S3 console, then this test dir is not reflected over here. It's because empty directories will not be uploaded to S3 which is created with mkdir command. It will only reflect on S3 when there is a file or object within it. So let's create a file within test.dir saying abc.txt. Now if I reload this, I should be able to see test.dir and within that abc.txt. So these were a couple of simple operations that I wanted to cover. If you want to now unmount the S3 bucket, then the command is umount followed by the directory name, that is mount s3-dir in my case, and then press enter. And now if I do ls mount s3dir, then the mount is gone, right? Basically it is unmounted. So now let's again mount the S3 bucket with the delete behavior. So the command is mount-s3 followed by the bucket name, that is recognite1, followed by the directory on which we want to mount this bucket, followed by the flag, that is -allow-delete. The bucket is mounted successfully. Let's do ls. Let's navigate to that directory. Let's try to remove this test.txt. So I will say rm-r test.txt, enter, and the file is deleted. And if you see on the S3 console, then it is reflected here as well. Okay, similarly, if I do cd thumbnail and try to remove the test dir that I had created using mkdir command, okay, and say enter, and as you can see it returned an exception saying failed to delete and this operation is not permitted. It's because there is a file within that directory, right? You can only delete the directory with rmdir command if that particular directory is created with mkdir command and it is empty. So for example, if I create a new directory that is mkdir abc right? And currently this ABC directory is empty. And now if I do rmdir ABC, then this will be successful. Now, for example, if you want to restrict all the other actions except reading, then what you can do is you can use read only flag while mounting the directory. So let me show you. So first I will unmount, followed by the directory name, enter, and I'm going to remount it. So it will be this command, that is mount -s3, and here I'm going to pass a flag that is read -only. Okay, it is mounted. Let's go to that directory. Let's try to create a file. I will say echo abc, write it to abc.txt and say enter. So as you can see, it returned an exception saying it's a read-only file system. You cannot write a file or you cannot delete a file as well. Now, for example, let's say you don't want to mount the full bucket. Instead, you only want to mount a specific directory or a prefix from that bucket. In this case, let's say I want to mount thumbnail as a prefix. Right, so in that case, what you can do is, let me first unmount and rerun the command saying mount -s3 recognite1 followed by the directory on which I want to mount, followed by a flag that says prefix space the directory name or the prefix name. So for example, let's say I want to access this thumbnail, right? So I will simply pass on this prefix, that is thumbnail / and let's say enter. So as you can see, it returned the message saying prefix thumbnail of bucket recognite1 is mounted at specific directory. Now here, while you add the prefix, you need to make sure to end it with the / else it will throw an exception. So make sure you add that / at the end. So now if I go to this directory and do ls, then I will only be able to see the contents within this thumbnail folder or directory. So this is how you can mount certain prefixes. Now apart from that, let me unmount first. Let me remount it again without any flags. Now if you have noticed that within this directory, if I do ls, so here I am able to see textract data. So if you look at the console as well, so here I am able to see the textract data, I am able to see the thumbnail folder, but I am not able to see this thumbnail object. This is one of the limitations that I have highlighted in one of the slides. So for example, if you have the object and the folder with the same name, then you will not be able to access the object using Mountpoint for S3. You will only be able to access the folder or the directory using Mountpoint for S3. So guys, this is how you can use Mountpoint for S3, and it is really a good feature that will make things easy for developers and also for relevant use cases like reading large objects and large-scale analytics applications. And I would highly recommend you to go through the detailed documentation for more information on Mountpoint for S3. So guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section about this feature and how it is going to help you in any of your projects or use cases. Now one last thing that I want to cover is pricing. So with respect to pricing, I could not find any official information from any of the AWS public resources, but as per my understanding, you will be charged for the number of respective S3 API requests like get, put, delete, and also for the data transfer and storage of new objects that you will create with the help of Mountpoint. It's because as we know that Mountpoint for S3 translates all the operations to the S3 API call in the backend. So all the S3 standard request, data transfer and storage cost will be applicable while you are using Mountpoint for S3. So guys, that's all I wanted to cover as a part of this video, and I hope you learned something new today. And till that time, If you want me to do tutorial on any use case or service, then please leave them below and I will try my best to come up with the tutorial as soon as possible. And if you have any queries or comments, then again please leave them below and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and see you next time.